Welcome to a channel where politics isn't dry. It's cinematic. Here, debates aren't just arguments. They're battles of truth versus noise, dignity versus arrogance, calm versus chaos. We take the viral moments you've seen, the clashes, the comebacks, the mic drops, and reimagine them as stories. Stories that don't just entertain, but inspire. Because behind every headline is a lesson. That dignity can stand taller than hate, that truth can outlast arrogance, and that clarity will always cut through the noise. This is where the underdog gets the spotlight, where the scream gets silenced by a single calm reply, where you get to relive the drama and walk away with the meaning behind it. Subscribe now and join a community that doesn't just watch politics, but feels it, because the next time arrogance tries to silence truth, you'll want to be here to witness the comeback. The moment Conway raised her voice, millions knew something unforgettable was about to happen. The television screen split into two halves. On one side, Kellyanne Conway, eyes flashing, voice shrill, hands slicing the air like knives. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, motionless, unshaken, her expression calm yet unreadable, as though she were waiting for a storm to exhaust itself. The studio itself seemed tense. Producers behind the glass leaned forward, headsets buzzing with disbelief. Commentators shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, eyes darting to the cameras, unsure if they should intervene or let the clash unfold. Even the audience watching at home could feel it, the strange electricity of chaos trying to drown out composure. Conway didn't just speak, she screamed. Her words were sharp, biting, laced with contempt. It wasn't just a debate, it was an attack. She had built a career on moments like this. Overwhelm your opponent with volume, seize the spotlight, dominate the airwaves. And for a split second, it looked like she was winning. But then the camera cut back to Jasmine. No raised voice, no frantic gestures, just stillness, and in that stillness, power. She blinked once, slowly, and let Conway's words echo in the silence like fireworks fading into smoke. Millions of viewers caught their breath. Was this calm a sign of weakness, or was it the prelude to something far stronger? The tension thickened. Conway grew louder, her voice straining, desperate to fill the void. Yet the more she raged, the more glaring the contrast became. One woman was noise, the other was clarity waiting to speak. In living rooms across America, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Some covered their mouths in shock, others shook their heads, texting friends. "Are you seeing this?" Clips began to circulate before the segment even ended. The scream had gone viral in real time, but what everyone really wanted to know was simple. How would Jasmine Crockett respond? She adjusted her mic, leaned slightly forward, and looked straight into the camera. Her lips parted. And in that suspended heartbeat, the entire country braced for impact. Because Conway had unleashed fury. But Crockett, she was about to unleash history. Every debate has its own pulse, its own rhythm. But this one was different. This wasn't just another primetime political segment. It was a collision stage at a moment when America's nerves were raw. The nation was weary of shouting matches, weary of the endless cycle of blame and division. And yet, when Kellyanne Conway took her seat across from Jasmine Crockett, millions tuned in anyway, knowing Conway's reputation for dominance. She didn't just debate, she bulldozed. Her name carried a legacy of spin, of carefully sharpened talking points delivered like daggers. For years, she had been untouchable on television, overwhelming opponents before they even found their footing. That night, the stakes were higher than ever. The country was wrestling with questions bigger than policy. It was about identity, belonging, and the meaning of respect in a nation fractured along every line imaginable. Who gets to speak with authority in America? Who gets dismissed, interrupted, shouted down? These questions simmer beneath the surface of every raised voice, every cutting remark. And then there was Jasmine Crockett. Newer to the national stage, she was not yet a household name. Some underestimated her, seeing her as another young lawmaker with fire, but not enough weight to challenge a media heavyweight like Conway. But those who knew her history, her work in the courts, her refusal to back down in the face of injustice, sensed something different. Crockett had never needed to shout to be heard. She carried herself like someone who had spent her life battling not just for her own dignity, but for the dignity of those who had no microphone of their own. Millions of viewers felt that contrast long before Conway raised her voice. It was written into the way the two women sat, the energy they projected. On one side, the seasoned spin doctor, sharp-edged and eager to pounce. On the other, the underestimated challenger, underestimated precisely because she didn't fit the mold of bluster and bombast. The cameras didn't just capture a clash of personalities. They captured the symbolic weight of the moment. To the immigrant family gathered around their living room, this wasn't simply politics. It was a reflection of the battles they fought daily to be respected. To young activists streaming the debate on their phones, it was about more than Conway's scream. It was about whether someone like Jasmine Crockett could stand tall and prove that calm clarity could outshine chaos. The atmosphere outside the studio mirrored the tension inside it. Social media buzzed with anticipation long before the first insult landed. Commentators previewed the showdown like a heavyweight fight. Conway, the seasoned champion, versus Crockett, the rising voice. And yet, as the seconds ticked by, it became clear this wasn't entertainment. This was a referendum on dignity itself. Every shout, every interruption, every flash of arrogance from Conway was more than personal theater. It was symbolic. For some, it was a sound of old power clinging to relevance. For others, it was a reminder of how often women of color are dismissed or belittled in the public square. And so, when Conway's scream pierced the broadcast, it felt like more than volume. It was the sound of America's oldest reflex, to shout down what it doesn't want to hear. But Crockett was ready. She had been underestimated before, dismissed before, interrupted before. And every one of those moments had prepared her for this exact one. What no one could predict, not Conway, not the producers, not the millions watching at home, was that Crockett's reply would not only silence the scream, it would redefine the debate itself. Because the way Jasmine Crockett chose to respond would leave Conway and the nation stunned. For years, Kellyanne Conway has been more than just a political figure. She has been a force of nature. To her supporters, she was a master of spin, a woman who could step into the stormiest of interviews and emerge untouched, her words twisting reality itself until the unbelievable sounded inevitable. To her critics, she was an embodiment of everything corrosive in modern politics. Combative, shameless, and willing to say anything, no matter how outrageous, if it bought her side another victory. Her career was built on fire. Long before she screamed at Jasmine Crockett on live television, Conway had carved her reputation as a fighter who played to win. Reporters learned quickly that an interview with Kellyanne wasn't dialogue. It was a duel. She thrived on confrontation, on rapid-fire talking points that disoriented opponents before they could land a single blow. Her tactic was simple: overwhelm with words, bury with noise, and never, ever let the silence speak. It worked. For years, she dominated airwaves, spinning controversies into slogans, turning scandals into distractions. When critics accused her of doublespeak, she invented new phrases, alternative facts, that entered the lexicon and became shorthand for political gaslighting. When asked to answer direct questions, she deflected, redirected, or attacked the questioner themselves. For Conway, truth was not a standard. It was a weapon to be bent, reshaped, and aimed back at her adversaries. Her arrogance was legendary. She knew how powerful she was on camera, and she relished it. In debates, she leaned forward, eyes blazing, her voice cutting across others like a blade. She would smile even as she insulted, laugh even as she twisted the knife. Many walked into interviews with her armed with facts, only to find themselves drowning in her torrent of words. For them, it felt less like conversation and more like combat. And yet, beneath that master of performance lay a pattern, contradictions that never quite disappeared. She could rail against corruption while working for administrations steeped in scandal. She could preach about family values while publicly defending those who shattered them. Time and again, critics pointed to the gap between her words and reality. But in a media world driven by volume and virality, contradictions didn't weaken her. They fueled her. Each outrageous moment kept her in the headlines. And in Conway's world, visibility was victory. She was the established giant, a gladiator in the televised arena of American politics. Opponents feared her, not because her arguments were always strong, but because her style was relentless. Once she seized control of the narrative, it was nearly impossible to wrest it back. She weaponized chaos. She understood that in the flood of noise, the calm voice too often went unheard. But arrogance has one fatal flaw. It never expects calm truth to strike back. And on that night, across from Jasmine Crockett, the cracks in Conway's armor began to show. She wasn't shouting at just another political rival. She was shouting at a woman who understood silence, who wielded patience as power, who had built her own career not on spin but on substance. Conway's scream was more than a moment of anger. It was the culmination of years of relying on volume over validity. For the first time in a long time, the old playbook seemed tired. What once intimidated now looked desperate. The scream didn't project dominance. It exposed vulnerability. Millions watching sensed it. The giant of spin was unraveling, and she didn't even see it happening. As her voice climbed higher, her control slipped further away. And all the while, Jasmine Crockett sat still, the silence around her growing heavier, stronger, more undeniable. In that contrast, the stage was set. The woman who had built a career on shouting down the truth was about to discover what happens when truth doesn't shout back. It stands tall, calm, and unbreakable. And when it finally spoke, Conway's reign of volume would meet the one thing it could never overpower. Long before Jasmine Crockett found herself on national television, facing down one of the loudest voices in American politics, she had already lived a lifetime of battles. Not the kind fought with cameras rolling, but the kind waged in courtrooms, in communities, in neighborhoods where dignity was not freely given but had to be demanded, case by case, voice by voice. She did not come from a world of privilege. There were no family dynasties paving her way into politics, no silver spoons cushioning the blows of life. Her path was a kind forged in the fire of struggle, the kind that teaches resilience because there is no other choice. While others were groomed for power, Crockett was busy fighting for survival and for the rights of those who had none. Her decision to become a lawyer wasn't about prestige. It was about justice. She saw how the system treated people who looked like her, people from her community, and she refused to accept it as unchangeable. In courtroom after courtroom, she faced prosecutors, judges, and adversaries who underestimated her, sometimes because of her youth, sometimes because of her gender, often because of her race. But she did what she had always done. She turned underestimation into her sharpest weapon. Crockett quickly earned a reputation for being fierce, but not for the sake of theater. Her fierceness was rooted in preparation, in clarity, in a refusal to let lies stand unchallenged. She was witty, sharp, authentic. She could slice through the fog of jargon with a single pointed question, or disarm an opponent with humor that revealed more truth than 100 speeches. Judges who once looked at her with skepticism began to respect her. Clients who entered her office with despair left with hope. Her rise was not glamorous. It was grueling. Nights spent poring over case files. Days spent in courtrooms where the odds were stacked against her. Moments of exhaustion where the temptation to give up loomed large. But Crockett had no interest in surrender. Every struggle deepened her resolve. Every dismissal by someone who thought she was too young, too inexperienced, or too different only added fuel to her fire. When she transitioned into public service, that same spirit followed her. She wasn't a politician who spoke in polished platitudes. She spoke in the raw, direct cadence of someone who had lived what she preached. Constituents recognized it immediately. She sounded like them because she was them. The same struggles that shaped their lives had shaped hers. And in an era where authenticity felt increasingly rare, Crockett's authenticity became her armor. She did not walk into Congress as a celebrity. She walked in as an underdog, overlooked by many in the establishment. But her presence in hearings, her piercing questions, and her ability to cut through spin began to turn heads. Clips of her speaking spread across social media, not because she was trying to go viral, but because her words resonated. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to fight for. It is precisely this history that made her showdown with Kellyanne Conway so symbolic. Conway represented the polished, privileged world of political operatives, a world where volume and bravado often drown out substance. Crockett represented the other America, the America of people who had been silenced, ignored, underestimated. When the two women sat across from each other, it was more than a television debate. It was a metaphor for the struggle between noise and clarity, between arrogance and authenticity, between privilege and resilience. Millions watching at home might not have known the details of Crockett's past, but they felt it. They saw in her composure the years of preparation, the thousands of moments when she had been forced to hold steady against hostility. They saw in her stillness not fear, but strength, the strength of someone who had been here before, just in smaller rooms with fewer cameras. Crockett was not rattled by Conway's scream because she had already endured louder voices in less forgiving places. She had stood in courtrooms where her words meant the difference between freedom and imprisonment for her clients. She had faced down skepticism from those who doubted she belonged. She had been interrupted, dismissed, and spoken over more times than she could count. And each time, she found her way back to the truth, steady and unshaken. That is why, in the silence after Conway's scream, Crockett did not flinch. She had been underestimated her entire life. But what her opponents never understood is that being underestimated was her greatest advantage. It meant they never saw the moment coming when her calm, razor-sharp clarity would cut through their noise. Every trial, every courtroom, every moment of being dismissed or doubted had prepared her for this exact second. And now, under the brightest lights, with millions of eyes watching, Jasmine Crockett was about to show the nation what happens when dignity finally gets a microphone. The clash did not begin with a scream. It began with the steady rhythm of interruption. Conway's voice, sharp and insistent, cut across the host, across her opponent, across anyone who tried to insert a word. Each time she raised her volume, the soundboard operator scrambled to balance the levels, but there was no balancing the force of her delivery. She was relentless. Every sentence was longer, sharper, designed to drown out not just arguments but existence itself. Jasmine Crockett, however, did not move. She sat poised, her eyes fixed, her hands folded loosely in front of her. It was a posture not of defeat, but of patience, the kind of patience that unnerves those who rely on noise. Conway took her stillness as an invitation to push harder. The volume climbed. The gestures grew wilder. She dominated airtime with the same ferocity that had carried her through years of media combat. For the producers behind the glass, it was chaos. Hand signals flashed. The host tried twice, 3 times to interject, but Conway barreled through, her voice filling every second. The contrast was almost cinematic. One side of the split screen a whirlwind of motion, the other side absolute stillness. Commentators seated nearby glanced nervously at one another. Was Crockett frozen? Was she unprepared? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Even viewers at home began to shift in their seats. On social media, live comments streamed in, "Why isn't Crockett saying anything? She's letting Conway steamroll her." The impatience was palpable. America had seen this script before, the loudest voice winning by sheer force. But those who knew Jasmine Crockett understood something deeper. Silence, in her hands, was never weakness. It was strategy. She knew that letting Conway's storm play out would expose its own emptiness. She knew that patience wasn't passivity. It was a prelude. As the tirade continued, Conway began to fray. Her sentences tangled into one another. Her points grew less coherent, her volume compensating for the erosion of clarity. What began as sharp dominance now sounded like desperation, an effort to hold on to control slipping through her grasp. The scream that followed wasn't a sign of strength. It was a telltale crack of someone who had pushed too far, too fast. And still, Crockett waited. She didn't flinch when Conway's voice peaked. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her eyebrows or roll her eyes. She simply let the scream hang in the air, let it echo, let the silence afterward grow heavier and heavier until the imbalance of the moment became unbearable. The commentators leaned in, sensing something about to break. The host, caught between the two, hesitated, and then the camera, almost instinctively, focused on Crockett. The viewers saw it before Conway did. The faint shift forward in her chair, the tightening of her jaw, the moment that patience transforms into response. The room held its breath. Social media feeds paused mid-judgment. The silence was no longer seen as weakness. It had become suspense. Everyone, the audience, the commentators, even producers frantically cutting camera angles, knew that Crockett's turn was coming. The question was not if she would answer, but how. And that question hung in the air like a fuse waiting to be lit. Conway, unaware how close she was to unraveling, smiled tightly, convinced she had won the round. She mistook Crockett's calm for defeat, not realizing that in the courtrooms where Crockett had built her career, silence was the moment before the verdict. The stage was set. The storm had burned itself out. The nation leaned forward, waiting. And then, in one calm sentence, Crockett shattered performance. The room was vibrating with the echo of Conway's scream. Her voice had risen to such a pitch that it seemed to bounce off the studio walls, linger in the rafters, and sink uncomfortably into the chests of everyone present. The host shifted in his chair, his professional smile cracking into unease. Commentators glanced at each other, eyebrows raised, mouths tightening into the kind of smirk reserved for a spectacle that had already gone too far. And then silence. Conway's voice, suddenly spent, trailed off. For the first time all evening, there was nothing but the faint hum of studio lights and the faint static in earpieces. She leaned back, chest rising and falling, convinced she had seized the narrative with sheer dominance. But the camera did not cut back to her. It held on Jasmine Crockett. Crockett, who had waited. Crockett, who had absorbed the chaos without a flicker of panic. She leaned forward ever so slightly, folding her hands together on the desk. Her eyes were steady, unblinking. No trace of anger, no trace of rattling. The stillness was magnetic, drawing every ounce of attention toward her. When she spoke, her voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. "Kellyanne," Crockett said slowly, each syllable deliberate. "When you have the truth on your side, you don't have to scream." The words hung in the air like the sharp crack of a gavel. For a moment, no one moved. It was as though time itself had stopped to register what had just been said. Conway blinked, her mouth slightly open, her face registering the first flash of confusion, then indignation. But before she could interject, Crockett continued, her tone calm but cutting, precise as a scalpel. "You can raise your voice. You can wave your arms. But at the end of the day, the American people don't need volume. They need honesty. And honesty doesn't have to shout." The reaction was instantaneous. A ripple went to the live audience, a low murmur swelling into applause before the host even tried to rein it in. Online, the clip was already being clipped, captioned, and shared at lightning speed. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens, their phones, their tablets. This wasn't just a response. It was a moment. Conway's lips tightened. She attempted to laugh it off, a practiced chuckle that had served her in countless interviews. But the laugh faltered. It didn't land. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time in the debate, it was not her noise commanding the stage, but Crockett's clarity. The host tried to step in, eager to regain control of the segment, but it was too late. Crockett wasn't finished. She let the applause fade, then added, almost conversationally, "You know what's funny? People who believe in what they're saying don't mind waiting their turn. They don't have to drown out the room. They know the truth will hold up whether it's whispered or shouted." Another wave of murmurs. Another sharp glance from Conway, her composure slipping further. Her fingers drummed against the table, a nervous tell the cameras didn't miss. It wasn't just what Crockett said, it was how she said it. Calm, measured, steady, while Conway had swung wild with volume and force. Crockett had stepped forward like a surgeon making a single, precise incision. The contrast was devastating. The scream versus the whisper. Noise versus clarity. Arrogance versus dignity. Crockett leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She hadn't matched Conway's chaos with chaos. She had done something far more powerful. She had revealed it for what it was, desperation disguised as dominance. The studio audience, emboldened, applauded again. Some even laughed, not cruelly, but with the cathartic release that comes when someone finally punctures a balloon of bluster. For weeks, That laugh will be replayed alongside Crockett's words in clip after clip, meme after meme, highlight reel after highlight reel. The air left the room, one commentator would later say. You could feel Conway's power deflating in real time. Conway tried to recover. She leaned in, forced a smile, attempted to redirect the conversation back to policy. But every word she spoke now felt smaller, diminished. Her voice no longer filled the room. It scraped against it. Every attempt at interruption now rang hollow, because viewers had seen what Crockett had exposed. The loudest voice is not the strongest one. The viral reply wasn't just a line. It was a verdict. And Conway, once the master of spin, found herself spinning out. Social media erupted within minutes. Hashtags were trending. Hashtag calm truth. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag dignity over noise. Clips of Crockett's delivery circulated with captions like, "This is how you handle a scream," and "Volume isn't victory." Young voters, activists, even comedians weighed in, praising the elegance of her counterattack. Commentators who had doubted Crockett's ability to hold her own suddenly found themselves revising their analysis in real time. This wasn't just a comeback. One analyst tweeted, "It was a masterclass." And Conway? She shifted uncomfortably as the cameras kept rolling, visibly aware that the tide had turned. Her confidence, once her greatest weapon, had crumbled in the face of something she had never anticipated: restraint. Crockett's mic drop counterattack wasn't about theatrics. It wasn't about shouting louder, moving faster, or dominating airtime. It was about reminding millions of Americans in one sentence that dignity doesn't need a megaphone. That is why the clip would live far beyond the broadcast. It would be replayed not just for entertainment, but for inspiration. Parents would show it to their children as an example of how to respond when someone tries to bully with volume. Teachers would quote it in classrooms about rhetoric and debate. Activists would echo it at rallies, holding signs that read, "Truth doesn't have to scream." Kellyanne Conway had walked into that debate expecting another sparring match, another opportunity to overwhelm an opponent with noise. Instead, she walked into a mirror, one that reflected her own unraveling in contrast to Crockett's composure. The villain wasn't defeated by a louder scream. She was defeated by silence, by patience, by the calm assertion of truth. And as the broadcast rolled on, as the host scrambled to wrap up the segment, as the audience buzzed with energy, it became clear. History would not remember the scream. History would remember the reply. Would you like me to paraphrase Crockett's viral line into multiple variations, all calm but devastating, so you can pick the best fit for narration? Or should we lock in the truth doesn't have to scream version? The broadcast hadn't even ended before the internet erupted. Within minutes, TikTok was flooded with edits of the moment. Conway's scream, looped over and over, cut sharply against Crockett's calm delivery. Young creators layered it with dramatic music, slow motion zooms, captions that read, "Volume isn't victory." Others turned it into memes. Conway flailing on one side of the screen while Crockett sat poised on the other, the text above reading, "Me yelling at life versus me actually solving problems." On Twitter, it was chaos in the best sense. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag calm truth, and hashtag dignity over noise shot to the top of the trending charts. Clips of Crockett's words spread faster than anyone could refresh their feeds. Activists praised her restraint. Teachers applauded her as a model of rhetoric. Even comedians couldn't resist joking, "Somebody get Kellyanne a glass of water because Jasmine Crockett just left her parched." Commentators were caught mid-broadcast, scrambling to adjust their talking points. One veteran anchor whispered off mic, not realizing the audio was live. That's the moment. That's the one they'll replay for years. Another analyst declared it the cleanest dismantling of political arrogance on live TV in a generation. And the praise didn't stop with the press. Celebrities chimed in almost instantly. Singers tweeted out the clip with fire emojis. Actors posted side-by-side comparisons, laughing at the sheer contrast. A famous comedian shared, "Crockett didn't just win the debate. She gave a TED Talk in under 10 seconds." Even athletes weighed in, sharing gifs of victorious celebrations with Crockett's quote plastered across the screen. But beyond the entertainment value, the response carried weight. Political figures, from progressive leaders to civil rights activists, seize a moment. They recognize what millions of ordinary viewers already felt in their bones. Crockett had embodied something larger than herself. One congresswoman tweeted, "Tonight wasn't about a scream, it was about dignity." And Jasmine Crockett showed America what dignity looks like. Meanwhile, Conway became the punchline. The woman who had once dominated rooms with her sharp tongue was suddenly cast as a caricature of herself. Clips of her screaming circulated with mocking soundtracks, from cartoon-themed songs to goat bleats. Late-night hosts pounced on the moment, delivering monologues about how shouting doesn't equal strength. Conway's defenders tried to spin it as passion, but the narrative had already crystallized. She had been undone by her own noise. For Crockett, however, it was validation on a massive scale. Young people, immigrants, women of color, audiences who often felt drowned out by the noise of politics, saw themselves in her composure. The TikTok edits weren't just jokes. They were affirmations. This is how you handle people who try to silence you. This is how you win without losing your dignity. Twitter threads dissected her tone, her choice of words, her timing. Communication professors lauded it as a masterclass in debate strategy. Political strategists admitted privately that no consultant could have scripted it better. The magic was in its authenticity. The line had come from Crockett's core, not a prep sheet. It felt less like a debate moment and more like a cultural reset. The underdog, underestimated by many, had stared down the giant and not only survived, she had flipped the script entirely. And in that surge of applause, memes, and hashtags, a deeper truth emerged. People weren't just laughing at Conway. They were cheering for Crockett. They were cheering for calm over chaos, dignity over arrogance, truth over noise. The clip replayed again and again, each time pulling more people into the movement it had sparked. Social media was ablaze, yes, but something more powerful was beginning to take root beneath the surface. Because the true power of that moment wasn't the meme, it was the message. Long after the memes faded, what lingered was the symbolism. Conway's scream was more than political outburst. It became a mirror of a broader struggle in America. On one side stood rage, arrogance, and the belief that volume equals victory. On the other stood dignity, patience, and the quiet conviction that truth does not need to shout. Jasmine Crockett reframed that moment not as a clash of personalities, but as a lesson in what kind of country America could be. She spoke later about it with the same composure she had shown on camera, reminding people that her silence was not weakness but choice. Sometimes, she said, you don't fight noise with more noise. You let the truth breathe. The metaphor was impossible to ignore. In Conway's scream, viewers saw years of politics dominated by shouting matches, insults, and spin. In Crockett's reply, they saw the antidote, a steadiness rooted in principle, not performance. It was as if America's crossroads had been staged on live television. Chaos on one side of the screen, calm clarity on the other. And the choice, Crockett implied, was ours. Would the nation continue rewarding the loudest voice in the room, or would it begin valuing the one who spoke with honesty and restraint? The answer felt urgent, not abstract. For millions of immigrants, for working families, for those who have been talked over, dismissed, or silenced, the debate was no longer about two women on a set. It was about whose voice counted in the country itself. Crockett's message carried a universal moral. Performative rage burns fast and loud, but it cannot sustain itself. Calm truth, on the other hand, endures. It may not grab the spotlight instantly, but when it lands, it resonates. The proof was in the replay. One line outshone 1,000 shouted words. Audiences felt it deeply. Teachers wrote about showing the clip to students as an example of composure under pressure. Parents told their kids, "This is how you win without screaming." Activists adopted her words as rallying cries. The moment transcended politics because it touched something elemental, the belief that dignity is stronger than rage. The crescendo of that truth built like music. Every pause Crockett had allowed, every second of silence, turned out to be part of a larger rhythm, one that reached its peak not in noise, but in clarity. In that silence, Crockett proved a truth bigger than politics. Dignity does not shout, it stands. And standing, It invites others to rise with it. Kellyanne Conway screamed. She raised her voice, stretched her words, tried to bend the moment to her will. But history will not remember the scream. History will remember the reply. Calm, steady, undeniable. Jasmine Crockett turned chaos into clarity, and in doing so, showed a nation what true strength looks like. That's the legacy of this debate. Not the noise, not the arrogance, not the theatrics. What endures is a reminder that truth is louder than any scream. Dignity is stronger than hate. And clarity, quiet, resolute clarity, can shake the foundations of power in ways rage never can. Because this was never just about two voices on a split screen. It was about the kind of America we choose to honor. Do we reward the scream? Or do we lift up the steady hand, the calm heart, the voice that speaks for something bigger than itself? Jasmine Crockett gave us her answer, and millions watching found theirs too. So here's your call to action. Don't let this moment fade into another viral clip. Carry it, share it, stand with it. If you believe in dignity over arrogance, if you believe in clarity over chaos, then hit subscribe, hit share, join the movement that refuses to bow to the noise. Because this won't be the last time arrogance tries to silence truth. And when it happens again, you'll want to be here to witness the comeback.